First, let's talk to Lester Munson, who is principal at BGR Group and a senior fellow at the National Security Institute at George Mason University, here to talk about the UN General Assembly. Good morning to you. Good to see you.
Good morning, Petri.
Right, so there's quite a lot to talk about this morning, but largely it's the condemnation of Vladimir Putin and Russia.
Right. Well, Russia, it's one thing to invade your neighbor unprovoked and earn the disdain of the civilized nations of the Western world. It's another thing to do it and do it extremely poorly and fail miserably in seriatim, as Vladimir Putin has done, and thus earn the ire of those who are your friends and those who attempt to be neutral in the whole conflict. So Vladimir Putin is getting it from all sides right now. Russia's not doing well. They're on their heels. They're backing up. They're losing to the Ukrainians, something none of us imagined really 7 months ago when this fiasco began. So it's entirely justified that he's getting the raft of grief that he is.
You say that even from his apparent allies, but we're not hearing much from China, though. We're not hearing much in the way of condemnation. Neither are we hearing much in the way of support.
Right. Well, we hadn't really heard much at all from China until the weekend, and then Xi and Putin met in Uzbekistan over the weekend. And it just took a little bit from Xi, dictator of China, to question what Putin is doing in Ukraine. That's going to have a huge impact. China and Russia had signed a treaty of friendship, unlimited friendship, just about a year ago. So this disdain from Beijing is new. It's going to make a difference. It's probably what led to Vladimir Putin making his speech yesterday, in which he talked about dragooning normal Russians into military service and threatening the use of nuclear weapons again in Ukraine.
So he's doubling down, basically. The more people tell him that he's doing the wrong thing, he's just going to push ahead.
He can't, in his position, afford to look like he's losing or to lose. The problem is he is losing. So he's got to make it look like he's not going to lose. That is why this threat of the use of nuclear weapons is serious. We should be taking that seriously. That may be the way he tries to get out of this, is by using a tactical nuke to define the end terms for this conflict. I think that is becoming a more and more likely scenario.
But if he were to use a tactical nuke in Ukraine, that is a massive line crossed, and at the moment we're not hearing what anybody plans to do about that if it were to happen.
Right, because no one in the West wants to commit themselves to a line of action that they may not be able to back up or that they may not want to back up. Let us consider one of the singular mistakes of the Obama presidency, promising to take action if Assad in Syria used chemical weapons against his own people. And then when he did that, Barack Obama didn't back it up. He looked for an excuse to get out of his promise. I hope leaders have learned from that. Don't make a promise you're not 100% sure you're going to back up. So I think it's sensible that leaders in Washington, London, and other Western capitals are not making commitments that it's possible they won't back up later. And frankly, we should be keeping Vladimir Putin on his toes. He shouldn't know what our response is going to be necessarily. I think the strategic ambiguity, we usually talk about that in the context of Taiwan, is actually quite useful for the West in dealing with a thug like Putin.
It is, but he must be taking some kind of succor from the fact that there is no language of retaliation coming from the West. He's now, in his own words, at war with the West. We heard that in that rambling, quite bonkers speech. And he either believes what he said or he's trying to make Russia believe what he said. Either way, it's complete nonsense. And does it not make us look weak that we're not suggesting there is a red line, don't cross it?
Petri, I don't, there's good people of goodwill can disagree on this question. There's no doubt. I don't think we're in a bad spot. Right now, Vladimir Putin cannot make the case in a reasonable way that he is at war with the West. He's just at war with Ukraine, and he is losing. If he were at war with the West and losing, it would be an easier explanation for him in Russia. That's what he is trying to say to his people. The smart ones are not believing him. The ones who are informed don't believe him. He is losing to a much smaller country, granted, one that has some amazing resilience and people of great bravery and much more resourceful, I think, than a lot of people thought. But he's losing to Ukraine. He's not losing to the United States, a superpower. He's not losing to NATO. He's not losing to the UK or France or Germany or anyone like that. He's losing to Ukraine. I think as long as we kind of keep him in that box, the better it's going to be in the long run.
It seems as well that I was reading earlier on today about his potential nuclear weapons, the larger weapons, the long distance ones, and there was some question about how good condition they might be in, because the one thing that I think we all expected was for Russia to be better armed than it actually is. And they're sending out these old tanks, these really old vehicles with Chinese-made tyres that keep, bursting. Their guns aren't working. They haven't got the ammunition. That has been a global embarrassment for him, surely, that because we've been giving Ukraine all these amazing weapons, brand new, state-of-the-art, and that's why Ukraine is winning.
That's right. And let's remember that Washington, London, the West, we overestimated the USSR during the Cold War. We estimated their economic might much greater than it actually was. We did not really foresee until it was basically upon us the collapse of the Warsaw Pact and global communism, at least as led by the Soviet Union. So we have, from where we sit, I would say collectively, in London, in Washington, and other places, have consistently overrated the threat that actually emanates from Moscow. Now, there's a rational reason for that. We don't want to underestimate them. That would be a bigger mistake. But we've overestimated them for a long time. Whether it actually applies to their nuclear weapons arsenal, I don't know enough to tell you. It's certainly reasonable to speculate that it's not what it should be. Nothing in their military appears to be that. But really, with nuclear weapons, it doesn't take much to really ruin your whole day. So we should be very humble as we make these estimations, I think.
The other weapon, of course, that a land war needs is personnel. Again, there doesn't seem to have been the right strategies employed. It seems that militarily, the generals are not calling it right, or Putin's calling it wrong. Somebody certainly is. But they need more men. So here we go with the mobilization, 300,000 people, men between the ages of 18 and 65. We've seen in their droves getting on planes to get out of Russia, those that could afford it anyway. That's 300,000. How worried should Ukraine be about them? They'd be ragtag, surely. They wouldn't be trained very well.
Yeah, I think these forces, these future forces, such as they will be, will probably not even be up to the level of what Ukraine has already faced. Russia's ability to train people quickly and get them onto the battlefield in an effective way is not very good. So we're not even going to see a real impact of this for several months, maybe into early next year or even the spring of next year. That doesn't mean this isn't going to be a long, difficult winter for the Ukrainians and the Russians and for others who are impacted by the energy crisis in Europe and perhaps the food crisis in other places. It's going to be a tough winter. Let's not kid ourselves. But this calling up of reserves, this pressment, this attempt to add to the manpower, not going to have an immediate impact, and even in the long run, probably not going to really change Russia's ability to achieve its goals. It is at this point, unless it resorts to strategic weapons, nuclear weapons, and even then it's unsure, Russia is not going to achieve its goals in Ukraine. They have already failed. The question is going to be, what are the terms of Russia's loss at the end of the day, and who sets those terms?
So there's a case then that we have to build an escape route for Putin so that he doesn't lose face.
Well, that's there's certainly a lot of thinking about that, a lot of talking. Let's remember this is happening in Ukraine. It is the Ukrainians who are shedding blood here. They have the most important vote on this question. It would be a huge mistake for Washington or London or anyone else to dictate to the Ukrainians what the terms will be for the invasion of their country when we did not send our people into harm's way to join them.
I agree.
Yes, we have been helpful to them, but we have not risked our blood the way they have. This is a Ukrainian decision. I think at the end of the day, that's the only way it's sustainable.
There was some conversation in North Korea a while ago that 1 million men might be sent from North Korea to aid Russia. Clearly, this isn't going to happen if he's had to call into mobilization 300,000 Russians.
Right. Again, even Vladimir Putin's allies or putative friends are not with him anymore. They see this as a loser, mostly because it's a loser of an effort. Russia is going to lose this war. Any country, even North Korea, is not that crazy. They don't want to be associated with this loss. We are seeing everyone turn away from him. He really is isolated more now than he has ever been internationally. Threats of nuclear weapons, of using nuclear weapons, talking about calling up 300,000 reserves. This is not going to change the fundamental situation that Vladimir Putin is in. He is now alone in the world.
And much conversation about Russians themselves in high places getting equally peeved with Vladimir Putin and seeing the economic destruction of Russia that is happening. Is that the possible solution to this? Is that his own generals turn on him if he becomes insistent about using nuclear weapons?
Well, you have to think that a responsible military leader in Russia does not want to see the incredible destruction that is going to happen to the military that he has been part of his whole life. He's not going to want to be part of national suicide. So it's very reasonable to think that someone's going to take the steps in Moscow to end this in a way from the top, in a way that we can't do from the outside. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? We don't really know. It's possible Vladimir Putin is replaced by someone who's even more hardline and more willing to double down in Ukraine, although that is hard to imagine. It is certainly possible. The real threat to him may be from those who want to achieve more in Ukraine than he's able to deliver. As much as we would like to think it is from Russians who are offended by the invasion in the first place, it's much more likely that someone is very concerned that Russia's pride is being harmed here.
But if Vladimir Putin had a heart attack, and that would then give Russia the perfect excuse, if you like, to call a halt to this, wouldn't it? It would give them to save face and bring Russia back into the fold, perhaps.
Potentially. Who takes over? What kind of control are they going to have of the various levers of power in Moscow and throughout the country? How will China respond to a change in leadership in their giant neighbor to the north? We could be opening a huge can of worms here that may be even worse than the situation we're dealing with now. I hate to say that because I think we're all rooting for Vladimir Putin to live a very short life and for things to change quickly in Russia. But we should be very realistic. A change may not be for the better. We should be careful of what we're hoping for. Well,
we've certainly seen, the West getting itself involved in regime change before that has backfired hugely.
Exactly right.
Just quickly, if I can, with you, do we have much to fear from China at this point?
Well, I think in the long run, the Chinese mode of government, authoritarian surveillance state that controls its own people, where there are no individual rights, where everyone is expected to make sacrifices for what the elite get to say is the good of the community is really a long-term threat to the West, to the rule of law, to individual rights and liberties, and we should recognize it as such. Does that mean that we're going to go to war with China in the next generation, 10 or 20 years? I don't think that's necessarily true. China's growth is going to be limited in many ways. It's got a population bust that's about to start happening. Its economy is not what the world thinks it is. The statistics we see are very likely highly inaccurate. There's a huge bubble in the real estate sector and other places, giant credit bubbles. The problems for China are going to grow and grow and grow. And I don't think at the end of the day, we need to worry about China trying to take over the world, but we do need to meet the threat of an alternative way of life to make sure that the sins of the Chinese Communist Party are as limited as possible, ideally just to China, that they don't spread to its neighbors. We're going to have a lot of collaboration with countries around China, including
like
some we
Taiwan.
don't really have a ton in common with, like Vietnam.
Yeah.
So I'm not worried in the long run about China, but I do think we have to take it very seriously.
Fascinating talking to you. I could do it all night.
Thanks, Patrick.
Really good. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure, Lester. It really has. Lester Munson, their principal at BGR Group and senior fellow at the National Security Institute at the George Mason University. You're with TalkTV and Petri, and I will be back in just a moment after this short break.